So today we're going to take a look at the question of, can turning hyperthreading off help with your gameplay experience on the PC? Let's take a look. Welcome back to Tech Yes City, ladies and gentlemen. This is Brian coming back to you guys today with a video on pretty much hyperthreading versus no hyperthreading in a few different scenarios on my 5820K. Now in the BIOS I do have the option of turning hyperthreading off and also limiting the amount of cores that can be used. And so with this I decided to test dual core versus dual core 4 threads, and then 4 cores with 4 threads versus 4 cores with 8 threads, and then finally adding in my 5820K running on 6 cores and 12 threads. Though I will say before we get on with these results is that it is a little bit different to comparing a Pentium versus an i3, for example, as in all scenarios there is 15 megabytes of level 3 cache on board there. So anyway, without further ado, let's get on with the benchmarks. So the first benchmark we are going to look at is Skyrim on 1440p. This is the Ultra preset, and looking at the results here, all 5 of these scenarios where you've even got the dual core 2 threads played absolutely fine with the frame rates going through the roof there. I mean, the minimum was 108 on the dual core, so that's something to note if you're on 120 Hertz and you're really anal retentive. But besides that, the i3, I mean the i3 here, for example, the simulated i3 did go over 122 frames per second on the minimum, so that's something to keep note about. And so pretty much on any 5 of these scenarios you're going to have a great gaming experience if you're playing Skyrim at 1440p on a GTX 970. So let's take a look at ARMA 3 at 1440p custom ultra settings. And now this is a really interesting benchmark to look at, especially when we compare it to the previous benchmark where we had the i3 in Skyrim beating the dual core 2 threads by quite a bit. But this time around it's not the case. The dual core 4 threads perform pretty much identical to the dual core dual thread. And in this case I'm going to say when I tested both these scenarios, there was no big difference, like there was no massive stuttering. And I'm going to say this for all the benchmarks I did. There was no massive stuttering on any of these games. When I disabled hyperthreading and turned it on, there was no difference worth noting in any of these scenarios. But for what it's worth, we can see here when we step it up to 4 core 4 threads versus 4 core 8 threads, there again wasn't much of a difference, though it is important to note that the minimum, it did score the highest minimum on ARMA 3 with the 4 core 4 threads. And that was even better than the 12 thread 6 core result. So for what it's worth, ARMA 3, it does love the cores. It doesn't really like hyperthreading. But let's move on now to the next game. So now we're going to take a look at Crysis 3 at 1080p custom ultra. Now I wanted to run this at 1080p over 1440p because when I ran it at 1440p it just becomes so graphically intensive on my GPU that even my 970 overclocked to 1600 megahertz takes a serious pounding. And this is at custom ultra settings. I usually turn maybe 1 or 2 really intensive settings off just to get a really nice frame rate there. As we see here, there wasn't much of a difference at all, and I'm actually really surprised with how well the dual core performed, because I remember when Crysis 3 first came out, I tested it on a Pentium with a 780 Lightning overclocked, and it performed terrible. So they've obviously updated or optimized the game for dual cores since then, and this game actually plays really well on a dual core nowadays. Keep in mind though, again, you've got that 15 megabytes of level 3 cache. How that affects in this game, how that actually affects the frame rates is yet to be seen, because when I did do my level 3 cache test, I did test it with a 660 Ti. So that being said though, there wasn't much of a difference here though. It is important to note that the dual core 2 threads in Crysis 3 scored a pretty significant lower minimum than all the other scenarios. So for what it's worth, in this game you would want to leave your hyperthreading on. Let's take a look at the last game, Battlefield 4. So for Battlefield 4 we went on the test range at 1440p with custom ultra settings here, and again this was one of those benchmarks that again didn't make much of a difference whether you had hyperthreading off or on. You can see here there's not much of a difference between any of these numbers. You probably put it down a lot to variance, though for what it's worth the 6 core 12 threads did kind of win, I guess, in all scenarios there slightly. Though for what it's worth, again, this is really not a biggie. I would say that, yeah, leaving hyperthreading on in this game would be desirable as well. You wouldn't want to turn it off. I mean, I didn't notice any big stuttering with hyperthreading on versus off. So with that being said, let's move on now to a conclusion. So in conclusion, you will just want to leave hyperthreading on. I found turning it off made no real world difference to gameplay, and in certain cases it actually took a hit to our frame rates, especially when we're comparing the dual core, for example, to the simulated i3. Also, you will get the benefits of using hyperthreading in other applications. Say if you're rendering a video, it'll definitely take advantage of those extra threads. Though, that being said, it is important to keep in mind that these tests were done on the latest architecture. That's the 5820K on Windows 8.1, which in my opinion, Windows 8.1 is better for multi-threading than Windows 7. So there could be some truth to the rumors of turning hyperthreading off helps if, for instance, you're on an i7-920. That's the first gen hyperthreaded CPUs on Windows 7. So there could be some truth there. I mean, just going forward, we're not going to be using old hardware and old versions of Windows. So for what it's worth, on an Haswell architecture on Windows 8.1, disabling hyperthreading is not recommended. Just leave your hyperthreading on. It's free performance and it's good performance anyway. So that being said, if you have any questions about this video, please leave a comment in the comment section below. If you like this video, then please give it a thumbs up, and if you haven't already, subscribe to Tech Yes City, where I'll be coming back to you guys with more tech news and reviews and juicy videos like this. Peace out for now. Bye.